I had been unconscious for 3 days following the difficult birth. My name is Lydia, and when I finally awakened in my chambers, my maidservant informed me that Vincent had already taken the child to Elena's palace to be raised there. I turned over in bed and said quietly, "Let him be." But later, Vincent arrived carrying the baby, earnestly bringing the infant close to me as he said, "This is our imperial son Sebastian. Look at him, please. Just take one good look." I found myself unable to summon any interest. Vincent's eyes reddened as he asked in a hoarse voice, "Do you not want him anymore?" "Yes, neither you nor the child. I want neither of you any longer." When consciousness returned to me, sharp waves of pain instantly brought back memories of the ordeal I had endured. It had been a torturous labor lasting more than 20 hours, from sunset until the following evening, with agony washing over me in relentless waves, threatening to tear me apart. I dimly recalled hearing a cry pierce the air at the very moment my eyelids grew heavy and closed. Now, awakening in my jade ripple palace, I was struck by how unnaturally quiet everything seemed. There was no sound of an infant crying, no wet nurse's gentle cooing to soothe a restless child. The first voice I heard was that of my maidservant Rose. When she saw me open my eyes, she wept with a voice trembling with emotion. "Your Majesty, the child is gone. His Imperial Majesty said you were too weak, so he gave the baby to Elena to raise. I dared to ask when the child might be returned, but His Majesty said Elena would love him as her own and that you need not worry. Oh, what can we do? How can we get the child back?" I listened in a daze, my eyes fixed on the golden silk canopy above for a long time. The intricate embroidered patterns seemed to blur before my vision, as if mocking something. Eventually, feeling dizzy and disoriented, I turned away and said softly, "One cannot defy imperial will." Rose wiped her tears and protested, "But that is your son, Your Majesty." "He belongs to whomever His Imperial Majesty declares him to belong to." After speaking these words, a stream of hot tears rolled down from my eyes. I knew Rose could not understand that in the depths of the palace, what did blood ties between mother and child truly matter? In the face of power, all familial bonds seemed so fragile. Vincent must be quite satisfied with this arrangement now. He had once said with his own lips that whoever bore the first son would claim the position of Empress. When those words were spoken, everyone in the harem understood clearly that there was no longer any suspense about who would wear the phoenix crown. Since Vincent's ascension to the throne, various noble families had continuously sent their most beautiful daughters to fill the imperial harem. Yet Elena alone had remained the sole recipient of his favor. The night I conceived was because he had drunk too much wine and mistook me for Elena in his intoxicated state. To think that after years of marriage to Vincent, we had grown so distant, it truly was laughable. Yet I had long grown accustomed to this coldness, even finding it somewhat liberating. At least I did not have to see that forced tenderness in his eyes. I had married Vincent when he was 19 years old. Before that, I had already been by his side for 5 years. From the time he was 14, we had been inseparable. Those were his most desperate and destitute days. He had once had an empress for a mother. But when the empress's family staged a rebellion, Empress Isabella's entire clan was exterminated, and she herself was given the crimson poison. The other princes took advantage of Vincent's period of mourning to plant seditious poetry in his study. Thus, Vincent was beaten nearly to death, stripped of his status, and cast into the cold palace. He was gravely injured with no one to tend his wounds, his life hanging by a thread. I went to beg the chief eunuch. The man looked me up and down and smiled slightly. "If you wish to save someone, it can be arranged, but not until tomorrow. As for today, I would not be leaving." When dawn broke and I emerged from the chief eunuch's quarters, my steps were unsteady and stumbling, my body covered in wounds. I had not known that the methods of tormenting a person could be so numerous and elaborate. Every inch of my skin bore witness to the humiliation of that night. But I told myself it had all been worthwhile. At last, I was able to bring the imperial physician into the cold palace. After the doctor finished treating Vincent, he hesitated before saying to me, "Let me prescribe some medicine for you as well." It was only then that Vincent realized the smell of blood he had been detecting was not entirely his own. When we were alone, he slowly removed my garments, gazing at the wounds covering my body, and said simply, "Why subject yourself to such suffering?" Why indeed? Initially, it had been for Empress Isabella. I had originally served as a lady-in-waiting to the Empress. Before her death, Empress Isabella had left a sealed letter instructing me to watch over Vincent. Having accepted someone's trust, one must remain faithful to that charge. This principle had been instilled in me since childhood, and it became the shackle that would bind my entire life. After saving Vincent's life, I remained in the cold palace. For 5 full years, Vincent and I depended on each other, sharing hardship and adversity. During those days, the cold palace felt like a corner forgotten by the world, with only the two of us huddling together for warmth. After 5 years passed, the seditious poetry case was solved. Vincent was released from the cold palace. The emperor bestowed a marriage between Vincent and me. When the marriage edict arrived, I could see disappointment in Vincent's eyes. His heart belonged to another, and I was merely a responsibility he was obliged to accept. Even after we became husband and wife, Vincent never touched me. I knew he harbored reservations. Therefore, I never actively sought his favor. Later, when Vincent ascended the throne, he granted me only the rank of consort, with the title obedient. Elena, who had watched him from afar outside the cold palace for 5 years, was elevated to the rank of noble consort. During the late emperor's reign, Elena had been the Empress Dowager's niece and had been close to Vincent since childhood. During the years Vincent was confined to the cold palace, Elena would pass food to him through a small hole in the wall. During the Lantern Festival, she would even exchange riddles with him. In the dark, damp, cold palace, Vincent was mostly melancholy and withdrawn, but he would smile faintly whenever he received something from Elena. I had never seen such an expression on his face when he looked at me. During my confinement period, the Jade Ripple Palace remained desolate. Only Lady Victoria came to visit. She spoke mockingly. "I thought you might gain status through your child, but instead the honor went to Elena. Now gifts are piling up like mountains in Elena's palace." I remained unmoved. I had long understood that in the depths of the palace, hope only led to deeper disappointment. Lady Victoria grew anxious. "I've never seen anyone as pathetic as you. Don't you know Elena is about to become empress?" She had come to incite me to fight back for my child and throw the harem into chaos, hoping to thwart Elena's elevation. But I lacked the strength for such schemes. I could barely get out of bed, let alone engage in palace intrigue. The next day, an imperial edict was issued. Vincent announced to all under heaven that noble consort Elena, having merit in bearing the first son, would be elevated to empress. The coronation ceremony was held on the eve of the prince's first-month celebration. That day, the sounds of music and dancing from the palace were so grand and prolonged that they penetrated every palace wall. The lingering melodies drowned out the soft weeping sounds from the Jade Ripple Palace. It was Rose. She had secretly brought Sebastian out, trembling as she held him out for me to see. "This servant and the wet nurse are from the same hometown." I begged her desperately, and while everyone was at the coronation ceremony, she allowed me to bring him out. "Your Majesty, please look. This is your child. Please take a good look." I stared at the child's face. He was a month old already, born a month ago, and this was my first time seeing him. I had thought that seeing my own flesh and blood would stir overwhelming emotions. Yet at this moment, I felt not a ripple in my heart. Perhaps I was too exhausted, or perhaps my heart had already died. The baby in the swaddling clothes cried fiercely, distressed at being taken from his familiar palace and wet nurse. "Take him back quickly," I told Rose. "If we're discovered, the wet nurse will suffer." Rose didn't understand and asked in confusion, "Your Majesty, won't you look at him a bit longer? This is the child you labored for a day and night to bring into the world. Can you really bear to send him back to Elena's arms?" What did it matter whether I could bear it or not? Whether I was willing or unwilling made no difference. Vincent was determined to provide Elena's position as Empress with the strongest possible foundation. Regardless of who had given birth to this child, he would ultimately have to acknowledge Elena as his mother. It was not my decision to make. Just as it had not been my choice that night, I suffered all manner of abuse at the hands of the chief eunuch. I said to Rose, "Listen to me, he's crying terribly. Take him back so the wet nurse can feed him." Shortly after the child was returned, the wet nurse immediately reported to Elena. Thus, Elena accused me of attempting to harm the imperial heir and ordered Rose to be arrested and tortured. When I heard the news, I fell from my bed, collapsing onto the cold floor. The black silk hem embroidered with gold threads suddenly appeared before my eyes. When Vincent spoke, his tone was reproachful. "I told you Elena would treat the imperial heir as her own. Why did you still order your servant to steal him away?" I grasped his robes and wept, "Return Rose to me. She was only thoughtless, with no intention of causing harm." Vincent pulled his garment from my grasp, displeasure evident as he said, "The child was already frail, and now he has caught cold. Your servant bears responsibility for this." I struggled to climb up, lifting my head to plead, "Release Rose and punish me instead. Please let me bear the punishment." Vincent's cold expression finally showed a slight ripple of emotion. He looked at me incredulously. "I've been speaking to you about the child all this time, yet you think only of your servant and never ask about the child's condition? The imperial heir has your Majesty and the Empress to care for him. I need not inquire further. I only beg your Majesty to show mercy to Rose." Vincent refused to listen any longer and swept away, saying, "This matter is not for me to decide. Ask the Empress." I dragged my weakened body to the palace of earthly tranquility. Since Elena's elevation to Empress, she had moved to those quarters, which were closest to Vincent's hall of mental cultivation. "Consort obedient, you cannot enter without announcement." The eunuch moved to stop me, but froze when he saw the bloodshot veins in my eyes. When I reached the courtyard, another barrier blocked my path. Elena stood holding Sebastian beneath a pear tree not far away, plucking petals as she smiled and cooed at the baby in her arms. She glanced in my direction. I knelt down. "Your Imperial Majesty, I beg you to spare Rose. From now on, she will never transgress again." I heard Elena laugh. A senior maid beside Elena said, "Consort obedient, please return. Her Imperial Majesty has no time to spare." Then she called out loudly, "What are you all standing around for?" Escort consort. Obedient back to rest. At her command, I was carried away. The palace servants, taking pity on me, set me down as soon as we left the palace of earthly tranquility. Gasping heavily, I walked step by step to the Bureau of Punishments where Rose was being tortured. Later, I found Rose on the torture rack. Her frail body was bound with thick ropes soaked in blood. She was dead. I collapsed heavily to the ground and lost consciousness. Seeing Rose's death, I felt my own heart die with her. When I awoke, the imperial physician said to me with a worried expression, "Your Majesty was already weakened from the difficult birth, and now you have suffered another severe blow. I fear that even if you receive imperial favor again, it will be very difficult to conceive another child." I should have been devastated, yet my heart felt utterly hollow. Perhaps losing the ability to bear children was actually a liberation for me. At least no more children would be taken away. After the physician finished speaking, he kowtowed tremblingly to Vincent, who stood nearby. Vincent's expression was very grave. He came forward and sat beside the bed, saying, "It was only a servant. We can select more capable ones to attend you." I remained dazed for a long time, repeatedly saying, "I only want Rose." "Consort obedient." Vincent finally granted me some pity. "If you behave yourself, I will allow the imperial heir to return." Though I had been listless and weak, I somehow found the strength to loudly rebuke him. "Don't give him to me, I don't want him." Vincent's pupils dilated as he stared at me in shock. He must have been thinking what kind of heartless mother I was. But from the moment of birth, hadn't Sebastian been declared no longer my child? Vincent had rarely shown such goodwill, yet I had rejected his overture, making his expression even more unpleasant. He raised his hand and ordered someone to bring the prince. After Vincent took Sebastian, he leaned forward, placing the child near my pillow, and said, "Consort obedient, look at your son." When I caught the distinctive milky scent that babies carry, I turned my head to look. A soft little bundle. The child had been well cared for. I had no concerns about him. When Vincent saw I had no intention of taking Sebastian into my arms, his gaze darkened suddenly. He seemed to realize something. But before Vincent could fully comprehend, the maid who had brought Sebastian said, "It's nearly time for the young prince's first-month celebration to begin. This servant must take him back, or Her Imperial Majesty will worry." "Take him back." Vincent paused, then added, "Don't let the Empress know what happened here. Do you understand?" Hearing this, I suddenly felt the urge to laugh. I was probably mocking myself. Even at such a moment, his greatest concern remained Elena's feelings. I was helped to attend the child's first-month celebration. During the feast, Vincent announced the child's name. The Empress and I deliberated for several days before settling on Sebastian for the imperial heir. Amid the congratulations, Lady Victoria asked knowingly, "Consort obedient, I recall that during your pregnancy, the name you chose for the child was not this one." I remained silent. Lady Victoria continued, "However, as long as Consort Obedient also favors the name Sebastian, there is no issue." I could speak neither of favoring nor opposing it. Like everyone present, I was hearing the imperial heir's name for the first time. But none of it mattered anymore. My physical weakness meant that sitting for even a short while left me exhausted again. Since I hadn't touched the delicacies on my table, young Princess Lily slipped from Prince Alexander's embrace, ran to me, and said, "Consort Obedient, why aren't you eating anything?" I said softly, "I'm not hungry." But Princess Lily insisted. "Your face has turned pale blue, which shows you must be hungry." I smiled and picked up a piece of sweet cake from the table, broke it apart, and fed it to the princess. This activity must have drawn Vincent's attention. When I turned my head, I saw his gaze fixed intently on our direction. Suddenly, Vincent called Princess Lily over to him. The princess immediately scampered across. At 5 or 6 years old, she was quite lively and feared no one, even going to Elena and poking Sebastian's cheek. Princess Lily suddenly giggled. "How curious! Little brother has dimples on his cheeks, and Consort Obedient has them too." With just that one sentence, the banquet hall fell instantly silent. Some guests even exchanged meaningful glances. The royal nobles present were mostly aware of Sebastian's true origins. Prince Alexander quickly called Princess Lily back. "You naughty child, you're becoming more and more ill-mannered. How dare you disturb her imperial majesty and the young prince? Come to this prince at once. Such impropriety must be punished." Vincent lowered his eyelids, his expression distant as he said, "The princess is young. There's no need for harsh criticism." Elena's face had turned ice cold, clearly displeased. I knew I was no longer welcome here. After briefly taking my leave, I returned to the Jade Ripple Palace. Upon arriving, my entire body collapsed limply onto the bed. I lay there weakly, despising this frail frame. Before long, a palace servant announced that Vincent had arrived and was standing outside the hall. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep. Even when I later heard someone sit down beside the bed, I kept my eyes firmly shut. In my dazed state, I sensed someone gently pressing my cheek, seemingly at the dimple. During our time in the cold palace, Vincent had often done this, but now it only made me shudder with revulsion. Vincent assigned me a new maid named Grace. Grace resembled Rose greatly. Vincent thought he was being kind. He didn't realize that every time I looked at Grace, I was reminded of Rose's torturous death. I couldn't sleep through the nights. The bedding beneath me was constantly being changed. Each time one was removed, it was soaked with blood. My postpartum condition was worsening. Sometimes the pain would cause me to lose consciousness, but only during those moments of unconsciousness could I taste a bit of relief. Was this what approaching death felt like? Soon I lacked even the strength to fear death, constantly falling into uncontrolled sleep. When I awoke, I would instruct Grace to tell the imperial physician not to report my condition to the Hall of Mental Cultivation. I didn't want to see Vincent anymore, though he had never wished to come anyway. He only worried about gaining a reputation for coldness and cruelty. During my illness, I lost track of how much time passed. I only vaguely heard mentions of Sebastian's 100-day celebration, his 6-month milestone, and such events. In my confusion, I would think, how big he's grown. Later, when the weather grew warm, Grace helped me sit in the pavilion of the Jade Ripple Palace to catch some breeze. Vincent came, bringing Sebastian with him. When I saw Sebastian, he had indeed grown much larger. He must have been 7 or 8 months old. Vincent actually brought Sebastian to me, his expression earnest. "Consort obedient, hold him. See how he's grown taller and heavier." He had indeed grown heavier. When the child was placed in my arms, they suddenly felt the weight. I looked down at him and said, "The Empress has raised him very well." For some reason, though this was clearly the truth, when spoken by me, it made Vincent's expression stiffen somewhat. I glanced at the maid beside Vincent, indicating she should take Sebastian back. I lack strength and might drop him. Vincent didn't let the maid take Sebastian, but gathered the child in his own arms. Then, pointing to me, he said to the babbling Sebastian, "Sebastian, this is your mother." Sebastian mimicked the sounds and said, "Mo there." He did speak the word, but his eyes didn't look at me again. Instead, they rolled around searchingly, apparently looking for Elena. Vincent kept watching my expression, but I felt no particular sadness. "Consort obedient," Vincent said gently. "If I were to return Sebastian to you, would you—" I smiled slightly as I declined Vincent's offer. Children are most sensitive to unfamiliar environments. Suddenly changing his surroundings might make him cry himself ill. It wouldn't be worth it. Vincent's face tightened abruptly, filled with disbelief. He seemed unable to comprehend how any mother could push her own child away. But truly, I no longer had the strength to raise a prince. Disappointment and incomprehension overlapped in Vincent's eyes. finally dissolving into bloodshot veins as he asked hoarsely, "Consort obedient, do you no longer want your son?" "Your Majesty, was it truly that I didn't want him, or was it that from beginning to end I never had any choice in the matter? If I agreed today, Elena would surely turn my Jade Ripple Palace upside down." As I had predicted, while Vincent still awaited my answer, Elena burst in uninvited. Her eyes filled with anxiety as she rushed straight to Sebastian. When Elena held Sebastian tightly in her arms, she looked at me with hostility. "Consort obedient, what are you trying to do?" I shook my head and said, "Your Majesty's arrival is most welcome. The young prince has been looking for your Majesty." I spoke calmly, as if Sebastian were merely someone else's child to me. Hearing this, Elena actually seemed stunned for a moment. She appeared incredulous that I wouldn't compete with her for the child. Even though I had yielded everything possible, Elena remained hostile. "Consort obedient should be careful not to pass your illness to the child." I stared at Elena and said deliberately, "If we speak of passing illness, that should have happened when I gave birth to him." "Silence!" Elena said angrily. "Sebastian is now recorded as a legitimate imperial son. How dare you speak carelessly about his birth?" Vincent called out gently, "Empress!" Toward Elena, Vincent was always gentle. Even seeing Elena's aggressive behavior, he merely indulged her with a mild reproof. "Your Majesty is right. As Empress, I shouldn't quarrel with Consort Obedient," Elena said, holding Sebastian as she brushed past me, then added, "After all, Consort Obedient suffered grievances in her early years and was even defiled by a eunuch." My body tensed suddenly. Those memories had been buried deep in my heart for so long. I thought I could remain indifferent to them, but when they were stripped bare and exposed so cruelly, my heart felt like a small creature, helplessly crashing about in panic. I suddenly no longer wanted to endure it and laughed at Elena. "Your Majesty finds me a contaminated wretch? But the Sebastian you're holding carries my blood in his body." Vincent suddenly shouted at me, "Consort Obedient, be silent!" His tone was harsher than ever before. When I looked at him, I met an utterly cold gaze. Vincent was truly angry with me, angry at my reckless words. After all, speaking of such matters brought him no honor. So Vincent indeed harbored resentment about this matter, just as I had suspected. "But your Majesty, no, I should ask you, who were once a deposed prince? Besides enduring that humiliation, what else could I have used to purchase your life?" I never voiced this question. Whatever answer I might hear from Vincent would no longer hold meaning for me. As I stood frozen in place, Vincent departed with Elena and her son. The Jade Ripple Palace returned to its silence and emptiness. But why had it become so quiet that even the imperial physician no longer came? Without medicine, the pain kept me awake through the nights. Grace grew anxious, trying to find ways to summon a physician. But I stopped her, shaking my head. "Don't sacrifice yourself for my sake." That's what had happened to Rose, and before that, to me as well. Grace couldn't follow in our footsteps, yet Grace still managed to obtain medicine for me. When I saw those medicines, my breathing caught, and I immediately began examining her clothing. I found Grace's body unmarked and unharmed. Grace dressed herself again, looking at me with confusion. "Your Majesty, what's wrong with you?" I shook my head, my whole body relaxing suddenly. Grace quickly explained, "I wasn't beaten by anyone. This medicine isn't from the palace. It came from outside, so the palace won't know about it." "From outside?" I stared at those medicines, and suddenly my eyes regained some spark of life. On the eve of Sebastian's first birthday celebration, which happened to be Rose's death anniversary, the wind and rain battered the windows that night, causing them to bang loudly. When Grace came to check whether the windows were properly secured, she found me sitting numbly on the bed, staring blankly at a corner of the rainy night reflected in the window. Grace approached and asked, "Your Majesty, what's wrong?" I clutched my chest and suddenly pointed outside, saying in terror, "Rose. Rose has returned. I saw her." Grace quickly comforted me. "That cannot be, Your Majesty. You're imagining things. Sister has passed on to the Pure Land." But I suddenly threw off the covers and ran outside in panic. The cold wind carried rainwater, both drenching me with bone-chilling cold. When my bare feet stepped on sharp stones, my skin split with painful cracks. But I never stopped running. Don't stop. That rainy night, the cold air was heavy, and Vincent had summoned the imperial physician to treat a headache. Later, he casually asked, "It's been a long time since any physician reported on consort Obedient's condition. How is she?" The physician started. "Several months ago, the Imperial Medical Bureau received orders to withdraw medical services from the Jade Ripple Palace." Vincent suddenly swept the medicine bowl beside him to the floor, where it shattered. The Emperor raged. "Why withdraw services? Hasn't her health always been poor?" The physician kowtowed tremblingly. "Yes, consort Obedient's postpartum health never recovered and has developed into a serious condition. I fear there may be no hope of recovery." Vincent demanded sternly, "If her condition has been this severe, why was I never informed?" The physician replied, "It was consort Obedient herself who said there was no need to report to Your Majesty." Vincent immediately stood and walked directly over the broken pieces. He was going to the Jade Ripple Palace now. A palace servant tried to stop him. "Your Majesty, please wait until morning. It's pouring rain outside." Suddenly, a cry of anguish penetrated the heavy doors of the Hall of Mental Cultivation. "Your Majesty, something has happened at the Jade Ripple Palace." Opening the door revealed Grace, soaked like a drowned rat. Despite her bedraggled state, she cried out that consort Obedient had suddenly been frightened and run from the Jade Ripple Palace and could not be found. Grace also pleaded earnestly, "Consort Obedient is weak, and with no physician available earlier, she has become critically ill. Getting caught in tonight's rain and cold, she may be barely alive. Please send people to search for her. No physician available. Critically ill." Each word seemed to grow sharp edges, drilling and boring into Vincent's heart. Was this like the inability to find a physician from years past? Exactly the same situation. Those days in the cold palace that Vincent regarded as shameful, unwilling to speak of or remember, suddenly came flooding back. He recalled that when he was near death, no imperial physician dared treat him either. It was the lady-in-waiting to Empress Isabella, now consort Obedient, who had begged for medical help. Vincent stared at the rain, his authoritative gaze suddenly losing focus and becoming hollow and helpless. Abruptly, the Emperor disregarded all attempts to restrain him and rushed out into the rain. After what felt like an eternity, he finally found consort Obedient on a high platform. She wore only thin clothing, with rainwater and blood mingled on her body, creating a shocking sight. On the other side of the platform flowed a rushing river. Vincent's breathing tightened. He wanted to help her down, but saw her body swaying further outward, causing him to stop in terror. "Consort Obedient, what are you doing?" But she trembled as she said, "Rose, I see Rose. She's come for me. She resents me." Vincent nearly roared. "That servant's death has nothing to do with you. It was clearly Elena who gave the execution order." Consort Obedient murmured, "Elena, Elena." Vincent suddenly remembered something, his voice trembling. "I'll make you Empress and return Sebastian to you. Whether the position of Empress or your child, everything will be yours, if only you'll come down." Consort Obedient actually laughed. She said, "I don't want them." She paused, then continued, "You, the child, the position of Empress. I want none of it. I refuse to be trapped by all of you any longer." Vincent said, "I never meant to trap you." Consort Obedient looked directly at Vincent, her gaze seeming to see someone else through him. Empress Isabella, she suddenly spoke, mentioning Vincent's birth mother. I once thought that letter trapped me for only 5 years in the cold palace. In truth, it trapped me for my entire life. As soon as she finished speaking, she smiled and leaned backward in the pouring rain. From the high wall came only Vincent's heart-rending cries, trying to call her back. When I regained consciousness, it was already too late. Blood surged from my mouth, but was quickly diluted and washed away by the rain. Nothing remained. Grace's epilogue. After Consort Obedient's death, I was transferred to the Hall of Mental Cultivation to serve His Majesty. It seemed that seeing me allowed traces of her existence to remain. His Majesty discovered that Elena had ordered the withdrawal of physicians from the Jade Ripple Palace. Not only that, but I also told him in detail how Her Majesty had been frightened by ghostly apparitions on Rose's death anniversary, leading to her mental breakdown. This revealed Elena's prior arrangements to have people create supernatural disturbances at the Jade Ripple Palace. When the truth came out, Elena removed her imperial robes and phoenix crown, dressed in plain white, and knelt outside the Hall of Mental Cultivation for 2 full days and nights, without food or water. Later, she collapsed on the cold floor. His Majesty emerged from the Hall of Mental Cultivation and carried Elena back inside. I thought he would not punish her severely after all. But I could not fathom His Majesty's thoughts. While one might call it excessive indulgence, I also witnessed him gripping Elena's chin and saying, "Sebastian will inherit the throne. He absolutely cannot have a deposed mother." Elena nodded vigorously, clutching at His Majesty's robes, sobbing promises that she would never again harbor jealousy. Oh yes, when Elena collapsed, she was diagnosed with pregnancy. Elena was finally going to have her own child. Immediately, the Central Palace was nearly trampled by visitors offering congratulations. Just when the position of Empress seemed more secure than ever, the child in her womb unexpectedly miscarried, becoming nothing but a pool of blood. Elena was heartbroken. The Hall of Mental Cultivation showed little reaction, even some coldness, because the loss of that child was His Majesty's intention. I was the one who delivered the medicine. After Elena's miscarriage, she suspected every consort who had interacted with her, except for me, the one who had brought the medicine. Later, His Majesty gently consoled her. "Empress, Sebastian is your only hope now. You must continue to treat him well." Unfortunately, Elena didn't hear the hidden meaning beneath those words. She only absorbed the phrase, "only hope." Just as before, she held tightly to this imperial heir, raising him with devoted care. On his 10th birthday, Imperial Prince Sebastian was formally proclaimed Crown Prince. When Sebastian was granted the Crown Prince's seal, His Majesty looked at him and said, "I wonder if your mother would be pleased about your becoming Crown Prince." Sebastian smiled and replied, "That this son can share your Majesty's burdens would naturally bring mother joy." His Majesty shook his head and said softly, "I wasn't speaking of the Empress, but of your birth mother." Sebastian was stunned. He had heard rumors that the late Consort Obedient was his true mother, but had always assumed they were false, never expecting to hear it from His Majesty's own lips. Sebastian showed a bewildered expression. His Majesty said in a deep voice, "I'm merely making conversation. Why are you nervous?" Then His Majesty gestured to me to escort Sebastian out. "Grace, take the Crown Prince to the ancestral shrine. I'll be along shortly." As we walked, Sebastian couldn't help asking me, "Aunt Grace, was what Father said truly real?" I smiled slightly. Not only was that true, I would tell him many more stories in the future about withdrawn physicians and supernatural disturbances. Even if Sebastian told His Majesty about my words, it wouldn't matter. His Majesty had kept me in the Hall of Mental Cultivation for years. Hadn't he long anticipated this day? Sebastian, let us take this slowly. By the way, after Sebastian's birthday came Consort Obedient's death anniversary. Speaking of her death anniversary reminds me of something I've kept in my heart for nearly 10 years. The year after Consort Obedient drowned, I encountered Prince Alexander leading Princess Lily into the palace. Princess Lily asked Prince Alexander, "Father, Sebastian's birthday celebration isn't for some time yet. Why are we entering the palace now?" Prince Alexander replied, "Today is Consort Obedient's death anniversary. His Majesty has suspended court, and I've come to see what's happening." "Consort Obedient?" Princess Lily asked. "The one you had me try to cheer up at Sebastian's first-month celebration?" Prince Alexander remained silent for a moment, then nodded. Princess Lily laughed. "Not only that, but you also taught me to mention the little dimples in front of the Empress." Prince Alexander quickly raised his finger to silence her. "Don't speak nonsense." These were things I hadn't known before. I had only known that when Elena withdrew the physicians and Consort Obedient was tortured by pain day and night, the medicine I obtained had also come from Prince Alexander. That's why I said it came from outside the palace. Consort Obedient never asked who it was from. I think she knew. How could she not have known? Prince Alexander was, after all, the worthy husband Empress Isabella had painstakingly chosen for her. When Consort Obedient was still a lady-in-waiting, everyone said she was foolish for entering the cold palace because of Empress Isabella's letter. But I heard that before Empress Isabella's downfall, she had genuinely cared for Consort Obedient. She had granted her the position of lady-in-waiting early on, and when she reached marriageable age, the Empress had even petitioned the late Emperor to secure her the honor of becoming a princess consort. Among the eligible princes, Empress Isabella considered Prince Alexander the best choice. The late emperor was initially reluctant, finding Consort Obedient's background insufficient. He had already chosen the prime minister's daughter to be Prince Alexander's consort. But under Empress Isabella's entreaties, the late emperor changed his mind and decided to follow the empress's wishes. Just as the marriage edict was about to be issued, Empress Isabella's family fell into disgrace. Along with it, Empress Isabella met her tragic end. Naturally, this proposed marriage came to nothing. Therefore, after Consort Obedient entered the cold palace to accompany the deposed prince, the late emperor immediately ordered Prince Alexander to marry the prime minister's daughter. 5 years after Prince Alexander's marriage, his consort finally bore a princess. This was when His Majesty had just been released from the cold palace. So by the time Princess Lily reached the age of running and jumping, Sebastian had just been born. Because Sebastian's birthday fell close to Consort Obedient's death anniversary, his birthday was never again celebrated as grandly as his first-month celebration had been. As for Consort Obedient's death anniversary, I observed it only that first year. That year, when I set river lanterns for Consort Obedient, I encountered Prince Alexander on the riverbank. Prince Alexander told me a story. The palace river had boats moored along its banks. One rainy night, whether due to the fierce storm or some other reason, all those boats were swept away, scattered across the river's surface. When someone was discovered drowning, there was no way to mount a rescue. They could only wait helplessly for new boats to arrive. But after so much time, where could anyone be found? I asked Prince Alexander if the drowning person wouldn't feel terribly desolate. Prince Alexander only said that spending one night sheltering from rain in an old boat and being carried away with it at dawn was not such a terrible fate. I understood then as if awakening from a dream. But if Consort Obedient had already made her decision, Why had she acted as though frightened by ghosts before fleeing? Suddenly, I thought of the phrase, going with the flow. Elena had arranged a ghostly return, and Consort Obedient didn't waste this performance, using it as an opportunity to appear mad and seek death. From that moment, His Majesty truly believed she had been driven to desperation. Consort Obedient never mentioned any of this to me. I only saw her haunted by spirits, then drowning in atonement. Then I recounted the ghostly incidents in complete detail to His Majesty, compelling him to investigate Elena. Thinking of this, I shuddered. Your Majesty, had you calculated this step as well? Otherwise, why wait until I came to check the windows before suffering your hysteria? Moreover, I remembered that I had already secured all the windows when darkness fell. Later, I smiled softly. My cooperation with Consort Obedient had been quite good. Actually, I served Her Majesty for only a few short months, hardly long enough to develop such understanding. Because our time together was brief, I witnessed none of the neglect she suffered, nor could I imagine the pain of having her child taken away. I devoted myself wholeheartedly to serving her because of Rose. People said Grace and Rose looked alike, but few knew we were sisters. Rose had served Consort Obedient for several years. On the day Elena had Rose arrested and tortured, it was also the barely recovered Consort Obedient who dragged her weakened body to plead for her sister's life. When the frail Consort Obedient was driven away by Elena's palace servants, I thought she too would die that day. Offending the central palace was invariably a path to death, but I never expected that Consort Obedient would abandon her husband and child and run away. Run then, run quickly, and don't stop. Sebastian's epilogue. This year, I turned 15, and great changes shook the court. Because Elena's clan had committed grave errors, they now faced exile for the entire family. When father was signing the edict, I stood beside him. He told me he would not depose Empress Elena. But at that moment, the Empress knelt outside the hall, kowtowing heavily, crying out in anguish. She pleaded with father and with me, begging me to speak on her behalf. Her cries were piercing, yet I remained silent throughout. Then lowered my eyes, struggling to hide my anguish from father. Later, the weeping outside stopped. Finally, I spoke, asking him, Father, if you could do it over, would you still give me to Elena to raise? Father's brush stopped heavily. He looked up, his expression grave. I chose a mother of noble birth for you. Until today, Elena's family had been prominent for many years. Are you not pleased? He paused, then continued. Sebastian, you were born with great expectations placed upon you. I was usually obedient, but today, perhaps shocked by events, I actually smiled bitterly. Father, your great expectations have caused me unbearable pain. As I smiled, tears came. All these years, I had learned from Aunt Grace about everything that happened back then. The one who raised me was also my enemy. I hated Elena, yet beyond hatred lay sorrow. When I came to my senses, father was still watching me, though his sharp gaze had grown distant and cold. When I left the hall of mental cultivation, I heard suppressed weeping from behind. Later, Aunt Grace accompanied me outside the palace to clear my mind. I mentioned my birth mother to Grace, saying, After I was born, did she hold me only once? Aunt Grace said gently, It wasn't that Her Majesty was deliberately distant. She was truly too weak. Don't blame her. I was startled. Where did you hear blame in my words, Aunt? Aunt Grace didn't answer me. She stood still, staring intently at a woman who had just passed by. What are you looking at, Aunt? She said, That lady's silhouette really resembles Her Majesty's. I said, I've never seen her, so I wouldn't recognize the resemblance. Grace softly called out, Your Majesty. But the figure showed no sign of stopping, walking farther and farther away. I chided her gently. Since she didn't stop, it's certainly not her. Besides, how could it be possible for her to stop? But Aunt Grace smiled slightly and said, "You're right, she didn't stop. How wonderful.